Okay, so we have our guest with us tonight. We're starting that big project that'll go through the end of the semester. Dr. Maya McGuire has a PhD in marine biology from the University of Miami. She's a faculty member at the University of Florida Extension, an extension agent. She is the lead investigator on the Florida Microplastics Awareness Program. That's a big, FMAP,
Yep.
which is a NOAA, National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration grant that they're partnering with. So Maya has very kindly volunteered her time, driven down from St. Augustine today to be with us. Our ability to work on this really cool campaign and do something instead of just watch what other people do is thanks to her being willing to work with us. So she's going to make a presentation, explain the project, the grant, what they do, give you enough background, and then if you have questions, right?
Yeah.
We chatted. She's a lot like us. That is,
Very
if you have
informal.
questions, something you want to say, wave an arm, interrupt her. She doesn't mind. Informal. She doesn't mind being interrupted. If you have ideas or want to ask questions or want more information, just interrupt our guest. She's very happy to do that. We will take a break, and then we will collectively do what we told you we were going to be doing tonight, which is second half we'll start brainstorming collectively what kinds of things, projects you think you guys might want to do to participate in this project. Your work for the week was to noodle around on the website, look at the materials, think about your ideas for how you and in groups of 3 or 4 are going to contribute to this project. So that's the second half of class, and Maya will be here. We told her she could leave if she wanted to. She said no, she wanted to stay. So that's tonight.
Unless it intimidates you, in which case I'll leave.
No. Anything else I need to tell before you get started?
I don't think so.
Okay. Questions about anything? Okay, then I'm going to go sit down.
Come on over. Alrighty. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to come here tonight, and I'm really excited about this potential partnership. As Carl said, I have a PhD in marine biology, so I work for the University of Florida as something called an extension agent. Basically what this means is instead of working in Gainesville at the University of Florida and teaching college students, I live and work out in the counties, and my audience is everything from probably second grade students is about the youngest I go, although I have worked with some kindergarten and first grade teachers, up through adults. And basically my mission is to teach people about the ways that human actions impact coastal areas, the ocean, the things that live there, the habitats, and then teach people how they can change their behaviors to have less of an impact on the coastal environment. So the project that we're going to be talking about today and the topic that we'll be talking about today is definitely something that I think you will see the connection to the environment, the sort of the impacts that it's posing, as well as hopefully you'll be able to see some actions that people can take, and we'll talk about those. So, okay, this was working.
Typically it has about a 3-second pause, but is it not working? Huh.
It worked when we just tested it. But
Yeah, I
the
wonder if it
light's
has a
not on
range.
anymore. I wonder if the battery just died. I can do this.
Or I can
Well,
do it for
then
you, but I
again.
also have batteries.
Maybe the whole presentation just froze.
The computer, okay, it's not just me then. The computer has had problems for us in the past, and the mouse doesn't.
Yeah, the mouse
Work
isn't being very
great.
responsive.
So
Okay, when I did the forward arrow on there, well, we'll make it work. We're flexible. So, if I'm going to talk to you about a microplastic project, I need to start off by explaining what microplastics are. As you might guess from the name, they're very small pieces of plastic. By definition, less than 5 millimeters is the size that is now considered a microplastic. Above that is considered macroplastic. So we're dealing with small pieces of plastic. We group microplastics into 2 types, 2 categories. We have secondary microplastics and we have primary microplastics, which I'll get to in a minute. Secondary microplastics are probably the sort of thing that you think of first when you think about small pieces of plastic and where they came from. Yep, you got it.
Hot batteries.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. So secondary microplastics are those plastic items that started their life as bigger plastic objects, whether it's water bottles, milk crates, containers, packing materials, anything like that. Over time, those materials will break down into smaller and smaller pieces, whether it's as a result of ultraviolet light, physical action, bacterial action, chemical action, they break down. And what you end up with are small pieces. Okay, that makes sense? One group of secondary microplastics that you probably don't think of, however, are fibers that come from fabrics. And they're probably really, really hard to see here, but maybe you can see the blue line right there. This one's a little harder. There's a blue kind of curvy thing here. Those are photographs taken under a microscope. The line here is part of a 3mm grid that's on the filter paper. So these are really, really tiny. Maybe that one's probably about 1.5 millimeters long, and I don't even have a gauge to be able to measure the diameter of it. Very, very small. Where are these coming from? A lot of them are probably coming from us doing laundry. So every time we wash something that is synthetic fabric, whether it's nylon, polyester, this mysterious microfiber, which is actually a combination of different synthetic fabrics, they're all plastic-based. They're all actually petroleum-based fabrics. And when we wash them, we get these little tiny threads that break off, and you're probably used to seeing the lint in your dryer, but you don't necessarily think about the fact that a lot of that lint is generated in the washing machine and then gets discharged with that water that flushes out of the washing machine and just disappears, right? Well, it goes to the wastewater treatment plant, and these plastics are very buoyant. They float. They basically just kind of pass right through the wastewater treatment plant because the wastewater treatment plants are not designed to remove very tiny, very buoyant solids. They are designed for much larger, more organic-based waste materials, and so the process doesn't work for removing these little fibers. I'll come back to why I keep harping on the fibers a little bit later. It'll make sense. Okay, the other type of microplastics are primary microplastics, and these are things that are deliberately made as small pieces of plastic. So we have things that we call nurdles, and I've got a box containing some nurdles so you can see them. Feel free to just pass that around. This is the way that we transport plastic to manufacturers. Yes?
Would a fishing line also be like a secondary plastic, or not so much? Just out of curiosity.
I suppose a little fragment of fishing line, I'm trying to think whether it would be classified as primary or secondary. It would be classified as secondary because it's made as a long strand, and if we were finding it in a 5mm or less piece, it would be secondary. The fibers, I have actually seen the fibers from clothing referred to as primary. I classify them as secondary for that same reason. They weren't made as little itty-bitty pieces, they were made as long strands. So people could probably argue that either way. Okay, so these nurdles, this is the way we ship plastic to plastic manufacturers. These, as far as I can ascertain, these are made by the petroleum companies when they're, as part of the process, when they're mining the petroleum products and then they're refining it, and then they get the waste products that they turn into other things. These nurdles are one of the resulting products that then are shipped by the container load to places that want to melt them, pour them into molds, and make plastic objects. In the process, when they're being sort of vacuum suctioned from warehouses into containers or trucks or however they're shipped by the millions and millions and millions, we have spillage, we have containers that go overboard at sea, and the nurdles in the box that are going around are ones that I found probably over less than a 1-year time period in occasional visits to the beach, picking them up on the beach out of the sand. So they do end up getting lost at sea, ending up floating around in the ocean. Oh yes, one of the other things that we use nurdles for is to stuff Beanie Babies and squishy pillows. I have to admit, I have a bunch of nurdles in my office. Okay. The other type of primary microplastic is one that has had quite a bit of media attention, especially in the last 3 to 6 months. How many of you have heard of microbeads? Only a few, okay. I'm gonna show you some. Do you wanna take one set to the back and I'll start one set in the front?
Here we go. Yeah.
So if you'll start them both in the back and I'll start sets in the front here. These microbead is an unfortunate name because as you'll see when you get some of these boxes, they're not always round, they're not always bead shaped. You may not be able to see that very well, but it will be clear that some of them are very round and some of them are not. What am I talking about? Well, these are little pieces of plastic that were made to be incorporated into personal care products. Things like face wash, body wash, toothpaste, deodorants, makeup products. Why are we putting plastics in all of these products? Well, that's a great question. Some of the manufacturers will say that they're in the facial scrubs, the body washes, the toothpastes to help scrub your skin, your teeth. As far as I can tell, it's been since about the 1990s that we've incorporated these plastics into these personal care products. One of the things we've also, we can see when we look at them is there's an aesthetic appeal to them. So I happen to be the parent of a teenager. Facial scrubs, especially teenage girls, they want the green one or the orange one or the purple one. Why? Well, because it's cool looking, right? It's purple. I like purple. Doesn't really mean anything. Purple doesn't do anything different than green, but you know, people want the different colors. Toothpaste. If it's shiny toothpaste, it's got to get your teeth clean better, right? It's shiny. We want shiny teeth. Let's use shiny toothpaste. The problem is the shiny parts are plastic. It's also, plastic is cheap. So if you're looking for a filler, if you're looking to make a product and you want to fill space, plastic's a good alternative. So we've got things like these little beads here. This is from facial scrub. This is from toothpaste. You can see very irregular shapes in there. This is another facial scrub. And what we're seeing in the facial scrubs, the white stuff is actually wax, microcrystalline wax, very, very small formulations of wax, which is also petroleum-based. The colored, the blues, and this one's actually purple, are the plastic, which is polyethylene is the type of plastic. We'll come back to that term. So there it is, right there. And I am making this presentation available, so don't worry about trying to capture anything that's on the slides. You will have access to them all. And there are notes with the slides as well, so hopefully all the pertinent information is there for your reference. So just like those microfibers that I talked about, these microbeads are also ending up going to the wastewater treatment plant every time they go down the sink, down the shower drain. They go to the wastewater treatment plant, and again, they're not effectively removed. Some may get bound up to other stuff and settle down into the sludge, but we know that a lot of it passes right through. And in many places, in Florida in particular, the wastewater treatment plant dump their effluent into coastal waters. If you're curious and you want to know, does my toothpaste contain microbeads of plastic? Number one, you could look on the packaging, but the challenge is you actually have to have the box for the toothpaste, because on the toothpaste tube itself, it only lists the active ingredients, and the plastic is an inactive ingredient. But there's also this great website. It's the Household Products Database. It's a National Institutes of Health maintained website, so it's got some credibility. And it's got a search engine, and you can type the word polyethylene, which is that plastic. It'll come up here. When you click on that, you'll then get a 6-page list of products that contain polyethylene. About the first dozen or so of those are things like Ziploc bags. I think Glad plastic wrap is in there as well. You'd kind of expect those to be plastic, but the entire remainder of the 6 pages is personal care products. I was really surprised to find how many different deodorants contain plastic. Why? I don't know. So I've got this great little video to show you. Any of you familiar with the TED-Ed videos? And TED, it's kind of like TED Talks, but shorter and often a little more fun, although TED Talks can be pretty cool too. Okay, this mouse is not
It's
my friend.
so odd.
Okay.
Meet the Nurdles. They may be tiny, look harmless, and sound like a bunch of
This is
cartoon
not working.
characters. But don't
Is
be
it supposed to
fooled.
be playing?
These little
Yeah.
guys
Let's just do, we can just link it. I think it's the version of PowerPoint
Okay.
that causes also the mouse to be
Okay.
wonky.
Yeah, because I've got an earlier version of PowerPoint.
Yeah,
So
so
we'll
let's
just-
do this.
Technical difficulty.
Yeah, quite alright, quite alright.
Because this is a great video, so you want to see it.
There we go. Should work. See, now the mouse works fine.
Okay.
It's not on the PowerPoint.
Meet the Nurdles. They may be tiny, look harmless, and sound like a bunch of cartoon characters. But don't be fooled. These little guys are plotting ocean domination. Nurdles are some of the planet's most pervasive pollutants, found in lakes, rivers, and oceans across the globe. The tiny factory-made pellets form the raw material for every plastic product we use. And each year, billions of pounds of nurdles are produced, melted, and molded into toys, bottles, buttons, bags, pens, shoes, toothbrushes, and beads. They are everywhere. And they come in many guises. Multicolored and many-shaped, they range in size from just a few millimeters to mere specks that are only visible through a microscope. But their real advantage in the quest for ocean domination is their incredible endurance, which allows them to persist in an environment for generations, because their artificial makeup makes them unable to biodegrade. So just as long as they don't get into the environment, we have nothing to worry about, right? The problem is, Nurdles have a crafty way of doing exactly this. Produced in several countries and shipped to plastic manufacturing plants the world over. Nurdles often escape during the production process, carried by runoff to the coast, or during shipping, when they're mistakenly tipped into the waves. Once in the water, Nurdles are swiftly carried by currents, ultimately winding up in huge circulating ocean systems called gyres, where they convene to plan their tactics. The Earth has 5 gyres that act as gathering points, but the headquarters of Nurdle ocean domination are in the Pacific Ocean, where the comparative enormity of the gyre and the resulting concentration of pollution is so huge that it's known as the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Here, Nurdles have good company. This gyre draws in all kinds of pollution, but because they don't biodegrade, plastics dominate, and they come from other sources besides Nurdles too. You know those tiny beads you see in your face wash or your toothpaste? They're often made of plastic, and after you flush them down the drain, some also end up in this giant garbage patch, much to the delight of the Nurdles building up their plastic army there. And then there are the large pieces of unrecycled plastic litter, like bottles and carrier bags, transported by runoff from land to sea. Over time, these plastic chunks turn into a kind of Nurdle too, but one that's been worn down by the elements, not made in a factory. And as if they weren't threatening enough, the rough, pitted surfaces of these microplastics, the name we give to all those collective plastic bits, waterborne chemicals stick or adhere to them, making them toxic. This gathering has grown so immense that the oceanic garbage patch can shift from around the size of Texas to something the size of the United States. But while this toxic tornado is circulating, the birds, fish, filter feeders, whales, and crustaceans around it are just going about their daily business, which means they're looking for food. Unfortunately for them, tiny bits of floating plastic look a lot like fish eggs and other enticing bits of food. But once ingested, microplastics have a very different and terrible habit of sticking around. Inside an animal's stomach, they not only damage its health with the cocktail of toxins they carry, but can also lead to starvation. Because although Nurdles may be ingested, they're never digested, tricking an animal into feeling like it's continually full, and leading to its eventual death. When one organism consumes another, microplastics and their toxins are then passed up through the food chain. And that's how, bit by bit, Nurdles accomplish their goal, growing ever more pervasive as they wipe out marine life and reshape the ocean's ecosystems. So, how to break this cycle? The best solution would be to take plastics out of the equation altogether. That'll take a lot of time, but requires only small collective changes, like more recycling, replacing plastics with paper and glass, and ditching that toothpaste with the microbeads. If we accomplish these things, perhaps over time fewer and fewer nurdles will turn up at that giant garbage patch. Their army of plastics will grow weaker, and they'll surrender the ocean to its true keepers once more.
Okay. And PowerPoint here. Okay, so I really like that video. I think it does a great job of introducing the problem, explaining what some of the issues are with microplastics. It talked about. Oop, now it's trying to play
It's-
again.
yeah.
Oh, because I didn't close out of YouTube. I'm sorry. I
We have
forgot we
some
were
good
gonna do
reasons
this.
to completely
It's
switch
under
over to
Chrome.
solar
Oh, it's under
power.
Yeah.
It's cheaper and it
Okay, go on. Sorry.
Okay.
Alrighty. So we know that these microplastics are out there. There are many, many, many studies from many different parts of the world looking at plastic in general, but also looking at these very small plastics. They basically tow big nets behind the boats and collect up what's in there. And there have been some studies comparing the amount of plastic to the amount of plankton, which forms the base of the oceanic food chain. We also know that these plastics are increasing in abundance. So there's a really famous quote by a marine debris expert named Dr. Anthony Andrade that says, "Every piece of plastic ever made still exists." So we think about that. Plastics really came into common use in the 1950s. They've been around longer than that, but really kind of became part of the everyday use for people. And every piece of plastic ever made still exists. A lot of it's in smaller and smaller pieces now. But it's not going anywhere because it does not biodegrade. Because it breaks into these small pieces, people often think, well, it's gone. But it's not. You heard about the toxins that absorb to the surface. One thing that the video states that we don't quite have a lot of data to back up is when the video talked about passing toxins up the food chain. To my knowledge, we don't have any studies showing that yet. But we do know that the toxins that are attached to the plastics will become separated from the plastics if those plastics are eaten by marine organisms. There are a number of studies showing that those toxins show up in tissues. And in fact, there's one study that actually looked at toxins in whale blubber as an indication that the whales may be feeding on plastic. It's hard to do whale gut content analysis. You don't get very large numbers of animals to be able to test. So what they did was they took these toxins as a proxy for plastic ingestion. And they concluded that in the 7 or 8 whales that they had to test, that I think 5 of them were showing high levels of toxins that they associated with coming from plastics. So there's a lot of suggestion that these plastics are impacting animals not just at the base of the food chain, or could potentially be impacting animals all the way up the food chain. What the video didn't mention is that the plastics themselves contain toxins. Yes?
Sorry, like what kind of toxins specifically?
So the things that we commonly call PAHs, polyaromatic hydrocarbons, the PCBs, the DDT family of pesticides, they tend to, for some reason, they bind to the surface of the plastic at concentrations much higher than they're found in the water. So they've measured these toxins on the plastic at concentrations 1,000,000 times higher than they're found in the water. So what that means is, of course, if an organism eats that plastic, it's swallowing a lot more of these toxins.
What are the, like, implications for the animal specifically?
That's a great question, and we don't really know because, well, we'll get to one in a second. Although it's not toxins, necessarily toxin related, but it could be. The research on all of this, especially when it comes to the effects on organisms, is pretty much brand new. The papers really didn't start coming out until about 2013. There were quite a few in 2014, 2015, but we're still at the will it eat it stage in the research, and a lot less on the what happens after that. We don't even know if these plastics are excreted by some of the organisms. So there are a lot of questions, as I think you'll see on the next slide. We have a lot more questions than we really have answers for at this point. which is one of the reasons that I think it's really interesting to be looking at this topic. One of the other sources of toxins are the things that are used when we make plastics. So some of you might be aware of, might have heard of a chemical called BPA, bisphenol A. It was in the news maybe 6 or 7 years ago, maybe longer than that, because it was used in making plastics, and what people found was that in baby bottles, it was getting from the plastic into the milk, and it's a potential endocrine disruptor and has all sorts of negative impacts, especially for a developing child. So they banned BPA from water bottles or any plastic container that was designed to hold liquids. But there's still a lot of plastics out there that are made with BPA, plus we have all of these 60 plus years worth of plastics that have been made that are out in the environment that still contain BPA. And BPA has also been found in the tissues of organisms that have eaten plastics in the ocean. There's another group of chemicals called phthalates that are softeners. They make the plastic flexible, and those also are thought to be potential carcinogenic type products once they get into organisms' tissues. Okay, I'm not going to worry with this one. This is just a video showing some plankton eating these little beads that were labeled with a fluorescent dye. So you see these little bright green dots. You see this little copepod, this little zooplankton, little animal plankton, and he's feeding, and you see the little dots enter the body and accumulate in the digestive tract. It was one of the first documented cases of organisms actually ingesting the plastics. I think it was from about 2013. There's since been a number of studies done in a similar pattern, using everything from mussels and oysters, shellfish, to different types of plankton. So I said more questions than answers. What happens when a critter eats these plastics? You saw in the video, and we know this from larger animals like sea turtles and some of our big birds, seagoing birds, that are eating plastics and then it's just accumulating in their stomachs. Well, those are bigger animals and they're eating bigger plastics, but we don't know if the same thing happens with these smaller animals that are eating these really small plastics. Are they able to pass the plastic through their system? Does it matter what size the plastic is? How quickly does it pass through? What impact does it have? We don't know a lot of these really basic questions. Will these plastics bioaccumulate up the food chain? So again, the video sort of alluded to bigger things eating smaller things and the plastics passing up. There have been 1 or 2 studies where you take really small plankton and feed them to slightly larger plankton, or maybe feed them to a filter feeder. And yes, those plastics, once they've been fed to the one organism, end up in the second organism. But again, we don't really know the so what to that. Same with the toxins. We know that the toxins will come off into the animal that eats the plastic, but then what happens to the animal that eats that animal? Don't know. And the big question, the elephant in the room, what are the potential human health impacts? Are there any? Don't know. When I first proposed the project, which we'll talk about at the end of this presentation, I had a colleague who emailed me. And I was asking my coworkers, because there are a bunch of us around the state who are extension agents who work on the coastal environment. And I was looking for supporters. I was looking for people to write letters of support and people to be willing to help with the project if it got funded. And one of my colleagues emailed me and she said, I can't support this. Okay, it's kind of an interesting reaction. She works a lot with the shellfish industry, clam farmers, oystermen. She was very concerned that people would be afraid to eat seafood if they learned that there were microplastics out in the water. And I said, okay, I get that concern, but the whole point of what I want to do is teach people how to reduce their contribution to the problem. The problem's not going to go away. The problem's there already. We need people to be aware of it and stop making it worse. But we don't know what potential human health risks there are. So this study just came out. It's actually not even available in print yet. It was published online February 1st, and it's in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences as of February 1st. This is the first study that I know of showing actual impacts of plastic on marine organisms. This was a study using Pacific oysters, and so they took one set of oysters and they fed them algae. They took the other set of oysters and they fed them algae plus these little polystyrene, these little plastic beads. And they used two different sizes of these beads, very, very small, 2 micrometers and 4 micrometers, really tiny. They did this for 2 months, and then they looked at the reproductive output. They did it during reproductive season. And then they looked at the reproductive output as well as the larval health of the oysters. What they found was that the oysters that were fed plastic along with the algae had much lower reproductive output. They produced fewer eggs and less motile sperm than the control oysters. They also found that the larvae that were produced were less likely to actually develop and survive. What they hypothesized, they did a kind of an energy budget calculation, and what they think is happening is that the oysters had to put so much energy into clearing these plastics through their system that they were actually eating more algae than the control oysters, but they didn't have enough energy left over to put into reproduction. Interesting. As I say, this is the first study that I've seen that actually addresses potential impacts. Kind of makes sense. Is it going to hold true for other filter feeders? Don't really know. Are other people going to be able to replicate this with the same species? Don't know. Time will tell us. A couple of other studies that were in the news towards the end of last year that try and maybe make connections to human health. This study looked at table salt. It was made from basically evaporating salt-containing water and leaving the salt behind, and then that salt was sold as a human food product. They looked at 6 different brands of sea salt in China, and they found that there were microplastics in that salt. I haven't seen the results of studies. I'm sure they're coming, looking at table salt in other places, sea salt. But that's the sort of one of the suggestions of, yeah, people are probably getting these plastics in their diet. You may not want to look for microplastics in your tap water because it might be discouraging. I have found microplastics both in tap water and in bottled water. Another study that came out towards the end of last year was looking at microplastics in fish and oyster digestive tracts. They got the fish and the oysters from seafood markets, both in California and in Indonesia. And they found not every fish contained microplastics, but quite a broad spectrum of types of fish, as well as fairly high percentages of the fish within each group. They had very small sample sizes. They got whatever they could get as whole fish at the seafood markets, but they were finding the plastics in those organisms. And there are a number of other studies that have just looked at fish in the ocean and found plastics in them, but they were often looking at the small, more plankton-feeding kind of fish, whereas this was, in some cases, much larger fish that are the type that we would want for human consumption. So people often want to know, well, how much plastic goes into the ocean every year? It can be kind of depressing. There were, again, 2 reports that came out last year. One was in Science, the top study. It was a group of engineers, actually, environmental engineers, who did estimates of the amount of plastic entering the ocean. They studied 192 different countries, looked at their waste disposal practices, and calculated how much plastic each of those countries would contribute to the ocean. And what they estimated was they came out with 8 billion tons of plastic, metric tons of plastic in 1 year. But I really like the visual that they interpreted that as. 5 grocery bags of plastic for every foot of shoreline in those 192 countries that they studied. This includes the United States. So what I tell people when I'm giving this talk over in St. Augustine or over in Flagler County, just imagine walking down Marineland Beach, and every time you take a step, there's There's 5 grocery bags of plastic stacked on top of each other. There's another 5 bags, another 5 bags, another 5 bags.
When they say 5 grocery bags of plastic, you're not talking about just an empty bag.
No, filled
A
filled
grocery
with plastic,
bag
correct.
full.
The
How's it
volume represented by 5 grocery bags. Not just the 5 bags themselves.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's just in 1 year. Again, how many years have we been making plastics? This second bullet may have triggered some federal legislation that was signed in December. There was a scientific opinion piece that was published. 8 or 10 authors signed off on it, and they were mostly concerned about these microbeads, so those things that were passed around that came from the facial scrub or the toothpaste. They did some back-of-the-envelope type calculations. They used other studies that estimate the number of beads, which, by the way, in the facial scrub, the estimates range from about 300,000 to over 2 million plastic beads in one tube of facial scrub, depending on the brand. I have not seen published estimates for the toothpaste. I've tried to count them. They fall apart really easily, so if you try and grab them with the tweezers to count them under the microscope, it doesn't work very well. But you see that there are a lot of pieces in there. What they estimated was that daily, in just the United States, 8 trillion microbeads get into the water, whether it's freshwater or oceans, each day. And then they said if you laid all those side by side and spread them out in a single layer, that would cover 300 tennis courts with little tiny microbeads. Pretty impressive visuals. And then multiply that by 365 days times however many years you want to be depressed by. Visually, this is an image which unfortunately is no longer on the website, but it came from the website 5gyres.org. 5gyres is a group that goes around the world and does those tows, those sort of plankton tows, looking for plastics. And then they took their data and they modeled it and they converted it into little white dots. Each little white dot represents 20 kilograms of plastic. And where you see just a big white smear, that's obviously lots and lots of little dots. And you used to, when this was on the website, you could zoom in and it was kind of a neat tool. But the reason I put this in here is, in the video it mentioned the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. How many of you had heard of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch before tonight? Most of you, yeah. A lot of the people that I talk to will say, well, yeah, it's awful that there's this issue in the Pacific Ocean. The reason I put this slide in is to show you this isn't just a Pacific Ocean issue. This is a global issue. Often you hear people talk about multiple oceans in the world. I talk about one ocean because the water's all connected. We have different ocean basins, but it's all one ocean. So plastic that gets into the ocean anywhere can end up anywhere. And I think this kind of makes that point pretty well. So, really depressing, right? What can we do? Is it hopeless? Is the earth doomed? No, well, hope not. I like to think that, yeah, there are things that we can all do because we can all make changes. We can all reduce the amount of plastic that we are generating as waste. Reduce, reuse, recycle, and I've added in refuse. A lot of other people now are also adding that. Some people even add another R. But refuse, I think, is one that doesn't get talked about enough. I said to Kegel and Carl, we went out to dinner tonight, and I didn't think, because I didn't know the restaurant, to ask for no straw in my drink. I'm used to going to restaurants where they bring you the straw still in the wrapper, and you can just leave it on the table. This one brought you the straw in the glass, and it came to the table, and I kind of went, oh, now I feel guilty. Because that's the thing that I decided to try doing. I already use reusable shopping bags. I already have an aluminum or stainless steel water bottle. I already bring my reusable coffee cup. I've got one with me in the hotel to use tomorrow morning. I try and be pretty environmentally aware, try and use as many reusable things as I can. If I go to a restaurant that I know, my husband and I go to limited numbers of restaurants, and when we do, we'll often have leftovers. And if I know that that's going to be the case, I'll bring a reusable storage container with me instead of getting a styrofoam takeout container. Okay? So things like that, I do, but the straws was something I've only started doing in the last maybe year and a half, because it suddenly occurred to me, I don't really need that. It's plastic, it's gonna get thrown away. And, you know, maybe it doesn't make a huge difference, but if everybody was doing that, it could have an impact. There's a group called that coordinates the International Coastal Cleanup. Some of you might be familiar with that. It's on the third Saturday of September every year. People go out all around the world and pick up trash from the beaches. And they document what types of trash there are. You can look up the data. Drinking straws are one of the top 10 items that they find. And not surprisingly, if there's a beachfront restaurant, they find a lot more drinking straws in the beach sand. What happens to that plastic? It just contributes to the problem. So it's pretty easy to think of some things that you can do. Another thing that I didn't really think about until just recently, that microfiber, remember I mentioned that's a blend of different synthetic fabrics? My son's a freshman in college this year. I had to buy twin extra long sheets for the dorms. Hadn't had to shop for sheets for a while. Was really having a hard time finding any sheets that were not made of microfiber. Microfiber is inexpensive. You get many, many more choices in microfiber when it comes to sheets, but a lot of clothing is being made out of microfiber. It's kind of the new hot thing. Microfiber cleaning cloths, all of those potentially shed those little synthetic fibers. So that's another choice that I'm making, is to not purchase the microfiber sheets, but to get cotton sheets instead. Beach cleanups are always good. Yeah, people will say, but there's so much stuff, you know, there's all these pieces of plastic and there's these little pieces, and how do I pick them all up? And I say, every little bit helps. Okay? I went to the beach a couple weekends ago, picked up a 5-gallon bucket of little pieces of plastic. Barely scratched the surface. But at least that was 5 gallons worth of plastic that wasn't going to get washed back out into the ocean. Okay, go.
What do you do with the 5-gallon bucket then, so it doesn't re-enter the cycle downstream?
Sadly, the best option is really to put it with the regular household garbage and send it to the landfill. I get asked that question with the toothpaste and the facial scrubs.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things here, check your labels on your personal care products. I've had people say to me, so I have these containers now of this stuff that I'm not going to use and put down the drain, but what do I do with it?
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard that question asked of other people, and we all kind of had the same answer. Unfortunately, the best solution is to put it in with your household garbage, so it goes to the landfill. You definitely don't want to put it down the drain. It's kind of like disposing of medicines. What's the least harmful thing that I can do? There is some good news on the personal care product front, though. So, 2012, people started to become aware, especially of the plastics in the toothpaste, but also plastics in other personal care products, and started putting some pressure on the companies that manufacture these products. So in 2012, Unilever, which makes Axe, Dove, I think they make Suave as well, they make a bunch of different brands, they were the first company to say, we pledge to remove plastics from all of our personal care products. And they set a date. They said, we'll do this by 2015. So on their website, it says that by January 1st, they had phased out all plastics from their products. In March of 2015, I went to my local Target, and I had the printout from that household products database site, and I'd selected all the products that I could identify as being Unilever, and then I tried to find those exact products on the shelves, and about 3/4 of them no longer had polyethylene on the label. So I suspect that the remaining quarter was just old stock that was still in storage that hadn't been sold yet. I need to redo that inspection and double check, but I strongly believe that they will be 100% polyethylene free. A bunch of other companies said, oh, we'll do that too. That's a good idea. We'll take plastics away too. But they didn't say by when. So in 2014, Target also jumped on the bandwagon and said, we've got plastics in our skincare products and in some other products. We'll remove all the plastics from our skincare products by the end of 2014. And in 2015, in March, when I checked the Unilever products, I also checked the Target brand, the Up and Up brand products. All of their facial scrubs were polyethylene free at that point. I honestly don't know what other products they had plastics in to check, but I suppose I could try and figure that out. So the good news is the companies that have set deadlines seem to be sticking with those deadlines. The state of Illinois said, this is ridiculous. We're just going to ban microbeads, the manufacture and the sale of products containing these microbeads in our state. And several other states followed suit, and they had a phase-out period and so on and so forth. We'll come back to that in just a second. The dental industry put a lot of pressure on Crest. People were coming in to get their teeth cleaned. Dental hygienists were finding little pieces of plastic shoved up underneath people's gums. They said, this is ridiculous. We've got people with irritated gums, and it's because they're brushing their teeth. Okay, this isn't very good. So Procter & Gamble said that they would remove microbeads from Crest by March of this year. So we'll see. But the big news, December of last year, and this is the thing I said was probably spurred by that scientific opinion piece talking about the 8 trillion microbeads entering U.S. waters each day. First, the House, then the Senate passed the Microbead Free Waters Act, and the President signed it in December of 2015. This goes into effect next year. It's a very short bill. The language is very unspecific. It bans microbeads. I'm not exactly sure how that's defined. And it bans them in rinse-off cosmetics. So I'm not sure if that includes deodorants and makeup products, or if it's just the soaps and the toothpastes. It does specifically include toothpaste. I'm curious to see, starting next year, how this is actually implemented and who's enforcing it. And is this January of 2017, December of 2017? There's a lot of questions with it, but it's a good start. Have any of you heard about this invention? Byron Slatt, the 17-year-old did a TED Talk about ways to remove plastic from the ocean. It's now probably 4 or 5 years later, and he actually has a prototype apparently that's either about to be or is being pilot tested in the North Sea. His idea was, we've got all this plastic in the ocean, we should use the ocean currents to remove the plastic. So we'll set up these barriers, and the ocean will basically bring the plastic to these barriers, and it'll all get swept into a central collection point, and then we can remove it. The problem with this suggestion is that there are a lot of scientists that don't think it has much merit. One of the issues is we've got a lot of plankton in the ocean. We've got a lot of marine life that float at the surface. How are we going to avoid removing all of that if you truly want to remove all the plastic from the ocean? We're talking about things that plankton eat. How can we remove those without removing all the life in the ocean? What about large migratory animals? What about whales? What about these large leatherback sea turtles? What about ship traffic? This device, these big floating things are supposed to be tethered to the seafloor. What kind of impact will that have? If a whale tries to come up underneath it, is it going to get impeded from being able to breathe? There are a lot of concerns, and then there's just how do you actually remove the plastics? What's going to happen to them? So I think, in general, there's a consensus among the marine science community that the big solution is going to be stop putting so much plastic into the oceans, rather than let's remove what's out there. Okay. So, the Florida Microplastic Awareness Project. What is this? It's a citizen science project. As Carl said, I got a grant from the NOAA Marine Debris Program that started in September of last year. And this is a statewide project. The whole goal, as I mentioned, people had talked about this as being a Pacific issue and not really seeing the connection to their own backyards. What I wanted to do was have people show to themselves that this is a local problem and not just a Pacific problem. So what we're doing is we've got volunteers all around the state collecting 1-liter water samples. They take this container, they go to whatever coastal area is convenient for them, they put it in horizontally right at the surface, collect water right at the surface, fill it up, put the lid on it, and then they bring it into one of our offices where we have a filtration set up. They use a vacuum filter this 1 liter of water onto filter paper that has little grids in it, and then they observe those under a microscope. And they're looking for those little hairs, the little plastic fibers, as well as pieces of plastic, as well as microbeads of plastic. And then tied with this, they all see essentially that same presentation, and we ask them to help spread the word to others, whether that's by manning an exhibit at an outreach event, whether it's by going home and talking to their friends and neighbors, whether it's going into a school and talking to school groups, whatever they're comfortable doing. We have some who've done press releases, and we've had some good media coverage in some locations. So the project is a little less than halfway through at this point. And so this is kind of what the process looks like. I talked about it. These are the filters. They're 47 millimeter diameter, so they're small filters. They actually have a grid on. It's a little hard to see in the pictures, but that means when you're looking at it under the microscope, you can scan it, and you don't double count anything, and you don't miss anything. So I'm kind of a science nerd, so I had to put some data in. Plus, I think it's kind of interesting. What are we finding? At this point, as of yesterday, we've had 216 samples analyzed. They represent 138 discrete locations. So some of these locations people have gone back to on a monthly basis, and we have as many as 4 samples from individual sites. Most of those are over in the Panhandle. These guys got started really quickly, and they've got some undergraduate students who are going out monthly and collecting the samples and analyzing them. Kind of not really surprising, but a little bit depressing. 90% of the samples have contained at least 1 piece of plastic. And that's just in 1 liter of water. Of those plastics, including all the zeros, we're getting about 6.5 pieces per liter, and about 5.5 of those pieces, 85%, are those little fibers. So the microbead ban is great, but microbeads are representing less than 10%, and even that's probably an overestimate because there's these plankton that are called diatoms that look a lot, they're spherical, and I've had people mistake them for microbeads that are working directly with me. If you squeeze them, they crumble, whereas a plastic microbead wouldn't. But some of the numbers that come through are maybe a little questionable. So if anything, it would err on the high side for the microbeads. But this 85% being plastic fibers is concerning. I gather you're aware that I have a website and that I have a Facebook group and a Facebook page. I know I've had a couple of people ask to join the group in the last few days, so maybe that was some of you. Thank you. And what I'd like to do is just go ahead and jump to the website and show you a couple things on the site, and then we can just answer questions. So, is it better to use Chrome rather than...
Personal preference. Whatever works for you.
Pull this up first. So the shortcut is plasticaware.org. You'll see that there's this long University of Florida website up at the top. I will say right off the bat, we have limited capability to be artistic and creative with our websites. Because it's a University of Florida site, we have to have that banner across the top with the solutions for your life. We have to have a menu bar down the side that contains the information. But the part in the middle, we do have some flexibility with. So the site basically has 4 sections to it. The home page is where we are. There's a Get Involved page, a very short K-12 resources page, and then multimedia and outreach. So if you're looking for that PowerPoint, you want to go to multimedia and outreach, and right here, PowerPoint presentation. That's the version that I would give to volunteers. It doesn't have the data slide, but you have that because Carl has it on his jump drive. There's other promotional stuff on here. There's a separate link to that TED Ed video if you just really like that and want to show it to a bunch of people. The household products database link is here, and it'll actually take you to the polyethylene page. So if you want to know which products contain the polyethylene, just click on that link. There's some fact sheets, and then there's some materials that I've developed. These one-page flyers that are mentioned here, don't trash the ocean and don't put plastics down the drain. I've actually got some copies of those here that you're welcome to take with you, especially if you can think of somewhere that might let you post them. They were designed, the Don't Put Plastics Down the Drain was designed geared towards bathrooms, and I think Florida Aquarium is going to put them in all their visitor bathrooms on the back of the toilet stall doors. The other one is more of a general, the Please Don't Trash Our Ocean is designed more just for a general awareness, like in a kiosk or a bulletin board somewhere. But I do have a bunch of those printed on nice heavy cardstock, so if you'd like some, you're welcome to them. And then there's some images, so I refer to my volunteers here if they're seeing stuff under the microscope. There are some images here. I have a few more I need to add, but you can click on them and see. There's actually two plastic fibers here. There's a clear one, and then there's the blue one. Sometimes the plastic is just little fragments, little chunks. That's what that one is. And then because the plankton often gets confused, that kind of shiny looking thing right there is actually a diatom, which is a type of plant plankton, type of phytoplankton. And that's the thing that I'm saying a lot of people I think are confusing with microbeads. And another thing that sometimes gets confused for chunks of plastic are sand grains, which are kind of cool looking under the microscope. Okay, and then the nurdles and labels and so on. So we've got a lot of images on there. On the Get Involved page, this is more the nuts and bolts for the project. So one thing I didn't mention is we have a pledge, and we ask people, it's basically a survey, an online survey, where we ask them, would you be willing to take these 6 or 7 different actions? And there's an option to say, I'm already doing this, and there's an option to just leave it blank. But what we're hoping is that people will say, yes, I will try and do this. And then if they provide their email address, every 3 months I'm going back through and taking the new emails that we've acquired and following up with folks. And again, a percentage of those folks will respond to those follow-up surveys and say whether they've actually changed, whether they've actually adopted any of those behaviors. So that's all good information that I can report back to the funders and hopefully is making an impact. So the QR code here, as well as the little image here, will link to that pledge. If you're interested in getting involved, you can click on the Find a Regional Coordinator, and you'll see, here's our map, here's Tampa. Katie Fortescue is at the Florida Aquarium, and her email address is right there. I talked with her earlier this afternoon, and she's very willing to have people volunteer with the project. We've also, in Pinellas County, maybe got Lara Milligan. Lara is one of my UF-IFAS Extension colleagues. She's at Booker Creek Preserve in Pinellas County. She's also actually just getting ready to start training a cohort of volunteers. So those are your 2 local folks. My volunteers, I asked them to go online and report their data. We've got a data and a volunteer time site. I used volunteer time as part of the match for this grant. I was telling Carl and Cable earlier today, I'm really excited because as of about 2 days ago, I've reached the amount that I needed for match for the grant, so everything else is gravy now, which is a big relief because you're stressing a little bit, am I going to get enough money and what happens if I don't have enough equivalent for this match? But we didn't have to deal with that. We've got a manual that I hope is pretty step-by-step. I did update it this week based on some feedback from one of the volunteers. Yep.
I read it today, it was pretty good.
Thanks. Appreciate that. And then there's the NOAA manual is much more technical. It's really designed if you've got a university-type lab. It involves concentrated sulfuric acid. It involves concentrated hydrogen peroxide that you have to heat up. These things in combination, and it'll bubble over. And I was reading that going, I can't do this with volunteers. This is going to be a liability issue. Fortunately, I found this group in Maine, the Marine and Environmental Research Institute, who's doing a similar microplastics project. They're having people mail in 1 liter samples to them, and they have technicians who are analyzing the samples. And I talked to them and found out what they're doing and said, okay, well, I can't be quite as sterile as you can in the lab setting, but for volunteers, we can follow essentially the same protocol. And they have a great guide that I give to the volunteers as well. If you're looking at something under scope, how do you tell if it's plastic or not? There's a little trick with a hot needle that you can put next to the little thread that you think might be plastic. And if it's plastic, the heat makes it actually move. Whereas if it's a natural fiber, it'll just stay put. So it's kind of a fun little trick. So anyway, there's a bunch of materials on here. So I guess with that, if there's any questions, I'm happy to take questions. I don't know, is it break time?
No,
yet? We got a few minutes
do some
before break.
questions
Okay,
and then, yeah.
How long is like training to collect water samples?
So the training, I usually set up a 2-hour training. The first hour would be the PowerPoint. The second hour, I have microscopes set up with existing filters, and I have the filtration equipment, and I have a sample of water, and we actually run them through it from start to finish. The hardest part is the identification. So the other thing that I do is, let's say to all my volunteers, when you've got your first sample, let me know when you want to come in and analyze it, make sure I'm going to be here. And I'm not going to stand over you when you do it, but I'll be here if you have questions. So if you come across something and you're not sure, while you've got it there, have me come and look at it, and I'll be able to tell you what I think. So 2 hours for the basic training, but then usually when they're processing their first sample, really kind of counts as additional training, which could be anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and a half, depending on how long it takes them to sample. Yeah.
And is that taking it to you in St. Augustine?
So my office is actually in Flagler County. I have another person who's coordinating in St. Augustine, but yes. So I'm coordinating the people in my own county, and they bring their samples into me. And then all those other coordinators have their own setups at their locations. So the grant funded 15 different locations. I've since had 2 groups want to join in and come up with their own funding to buy their own equipment. So we're adding them in as well.
So can the Florida Aquarium in Tampa do this?
Yes, the Florida Aquarium in Tampa has the set of equipment.
Okay, so if we got volunteers and worked with them, they could learn how and process their own samples right in downtown Tampa.
Correct. Yeah. And Lara Milligan in Pinellas County has, I think, 3 sets of equipment, because I think, or maybe she's got 2. She had purchased her own set before the grant came through, and then when the grant came through, she got an additional set from me. So, yeah.
You talked about the number of volunteers.
Yes.
Is there any other goals, like number of
The
events?
deliverables for the
Yeah,
grant.
or like pledgers?
What I said I would do with the grant, what I sort of guaranteed, was 200 to 300 water samples processed. So we've reached the 200, and I'm certainly hopeful that we'll get many, many more than the 200 to 300. I believe I said 1,000 pledges. We're pretty shy on that. I think we've got less than 200 at this point.
This is something we can work.
Yeah, yeah. I'm hoping, because we're coming up on Earth Day, that tends to be a big outreach event time, lots of fairs and festivals that are environmentally oriented. So I'm hoping that all of my coordinators are going to have volunteers going out and having at least one exhibit during Earth Day. And what the newer thing that we got is we got some tote bags that have I pledge to keep our ocean clean by saying no to polyethylene, which we had all this done before that bill was passed in Congress, but still a good message. What I'm doing with these is if people sign the pledge, they get the free tote bag at the outreach events. It worked
Everybody's
out pretty
excited
well.
about. Did you hear that?
Yeah, I
murmur
did. I
in the
heard that.
room? Everyone wants
So
to
I
take
actually
that.
had some volunteers at my local county health fair. So all the county employees go because they get freebie stuff. And my volunteers got 37 people to sign the pledge and get free tote bags. So that was good. What other deliverables do I have?
Can I ask one more thing about the pledge?
Yes.
What's the follow-up rate on that? So you said that you do the 3-month follow-up.
So when I did the first 3-month follow-up, I think I only had maybe 50 or so people who had provided their email addresses, and I got 20 responses.
That's not a bad response
So it wasn't
rate,
bad,
though.
but when you think about the fact that they
40%.
actually provided their email address knowing that they were going to be contacted, I kind of hoped for a little
Yeah.
bit higher, but no, I'm not too disappointed with that.
Yeah.
I will at the end of March. I'll do my
huge
next.
response rate for social
Yeah.
science
Oh, yeah.
research.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
In terms of who, I haven't analyzed the percentage that actually provided their email addresses based on, as a percentage of the total.
Mhm.
I can do that. I just haven't.
Okay.
So,
Interesting.
yes.
There's another question. You say it's a state project.
Yes.
Is there any areas that you need to work on it? Is it like mapping?
So there are
We're
some.
here on the West Coast.
Yeah, there are some coordinators that are either just getting ready to get started or are still trying to figure out how to fit this into their programming. And Florida Aquarium is actually one of those. They've gone out and collected some samples themselves, and that's where those few samples in Tampa Bay have come from. But I talked to Katie earlier, and she was eager to try and get volunteers and get a program going. She's one of their educators. She's a watershed educator. So she has her kind of set things that she does, and she's trying to figure out how to fit this into what she does. But she's definitely willing to work with folks if you're interested. There are other coordinators, like my coordinator down in Key West. She has another water quality monitoring citizen science project, and she was going to integrate this into that, but I need to follow up with her because I don't know where that is at this point. I've seen no data coming from her. So, got one behind you. Come back. Oh, okay.
Just the last one. You talked about Florida Aquarium.
Yes.
Is there any other partnership, like Clearwater Aquarium or like theme parks?
So I have of the now 16 different coordinators, 11 of them are extension, so they're my colleagues. We have the St. John's Riverkeeper up in Jacksonville. We have a group called the Marine Discovery Center in Volusia County, which is an eco-tour kind of provider. We have 2 National Estuarine Research Reserves, the Guantanamo Matanzas NER up in St. Augustine, and then Rookery Bay NER in Naples. There's a group called Marine Lab in Key Largo that is one of our coordinators, and then Florida Aquarium. I think that's it.
What about Tampa Bay Watch? Are they doing it? I could have sworn, because I was over there not too long ago.
There are some other microplastics projects that are going on that are not part of this, but we're kind of aware of each other. I would love at some point to figure out how to merge all the data into a single, but for the purposes of me having to report to the grant funders, I need to keep my stuff separate for now. But that grant is a 1-year grant, so come the end of August, the clock stops and we get to start over. So.
Which reminds me, I cut you off with my question about the responses to the pledges on grant deliverables. So you had told us about the water samples processing, the pledges. What else that we might?
Is the volunteer time, which we've met. What else was in there? I'll pull up the proposal during the break and see what else.
I was just thinking for it to give us ideas for
Right.
the kinds of things that we might do.
Yeah.
So, but it sounds like even with the getting more people in Tampa and the pledges, that's already plenty of opportunity for support.
Yeah, there's definitely
Okay.
lots of help there.
Yeah,
Yes.
I was just gonna say on a similar note, you said you had like undergrads in the Panhandle
Mhm.
finding samples. That seems like a great idea.
Yeah. And we were talking a little bit at dinner that it may well be possible. I drove down here with a friend whose son is a freshman here this year, so she's spending the evening with him. And it turns out he's taking an oceanography class with a professor that I know from the Marine campus over in St. Pete, Teresa Greeley. And so I could probably talk to Teresa and we could probably get something set up. Yeah, I'm sure she's got some similar equipment that could be used. I can provide her with filters. So there may be the opportunity to set up more convenient labs even.
Yeah, undergrads
Perfect.
seem to be always interested in that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I talked to a marine science class at UCF 2 weeks ago, and they are doing, half of their group is doing microplastics as their class project using the same methodology as mine, and they're going to contribute the data to me. So, yeah.
When you talked about collecting the data and you said that for some areas you have 4
Mhm.
different months. I mean, do you have a consistency that you only want certain areas every month, or does it not really matter?
No, because this is a citizen science project, what I wanted to do is make it convenient for the citizen scientists. So what I say to them is, if you want to go to a single spot monthly and collect samples every month, great. If you want to kind of go to 6 different places over the course of the next year and collect samples, great. It's all data. It tells me different things. So I actually kind of like having both of those, because when you have the bigger area represented, you get the big picture. When you've got the repeat sampling, you get an idea of the variability. And I was going to show you, I'll just zoom in. This is the map of the data so far. I'm going to zoom in on the panhandle just because they're really interesting. The black site right here has no plastic. So the color of the pin is an indication of the number of pieces of plastic in the sample. The red is more than 20. The blue is 0 to 10, so more than 0, but up to 10, and including 10. And then the orange color is more than 10, but less than 20, or more than 10 up to 20. And so if you click on an individual pin, what you'll see is this one's the average of 3 samples, and then you've got the individual data in there as well. I have all of this in Excel, which is probably a more useful process if you're wanting to do something with the data, but this gives you kind of the picture. Oops, it's not the one I wanted. Try that one.
You do like latitude, longitude, right?
Yes, so the latitude, longitude the volunteers provide, sometimes the pins end up being in places they shouldn't be, and I end up having to follow up with the local coordinator and say, okay, this sample was reported for this location, and it's coming out in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. Did they really go out in a boat and collect it, or is there an error? Because it has to be in decimal degrees, and sometimes they'll put in degree, minutes, seconds as decimal degrees. And of course, then that messes it up. But I think we've managed to fix all of those. I did notice a couple yesterday and got those fixed, I
Is
think.
that through the University of West Florida? That they're all?
Yes. Yeah, those students are, it's my colleague in Escambia County is working with the University of West Florida, and it's those undergraduates. And he has a different crop each semester, so he has to kind of start over each semester with them. But you can see, like this one site that's in red, that's an average of 4 samples. So they're pretty consistently high, but there was one that really skewed it, had 50 fibers. This one with 21 was still pretty high, but then 9 fibers, 2 fragments, so we're talking 11 pieces total. This one only had 7. So it's interesting to look at and kind of speculate. Some of the tributaries, this one's right by the University of West Florida campus. That one had 37 pieces of plastic in it. And then you've got another one that's kind of upstream. All of these ones up here have relatively low densities and actually have, some of the ones with multiple samples have like 3 zeros and then a 4 or something. So it gives it a number, but they were mostly zeros. So again, as a data geek, it's kind of interesting for me to look at and speculate. And I've talked with the NOAA Marine Debris Program's regional coordinator, who I'm working with, and she's offered that they have a lot of GIS people, so they could actually overlay some layers on the map. So I'm curious maybe to look at population density or something along those lines and see if there are any trends that match the trends of the data once we get a more robust data set. And again, keeping in mind that this is citizen science collected data, so it's not necessarily guaranteed 100%.
Do you only collect water from coastal areas, or do you also collect it from rivers?
The grant is a marine debris grant, so one of the stipulations was it had to be at least brackish, tidally influenced waters. So for the purposes of this project, we are sticking to coastal areas. I have put in another grant to the EPA. They have a program called Urban Waters Small Grants. That one submitted back in December, I think. And I'll probably hear, if it is going to be funded, I'll probably hear in April or May, and it would start September once this one ends. That would be more to look at a watershed kind of approach, so it would include inland. And I have a colleague in Ocala who is going to a Springs Festival, and she's asked me to come and bring the filtration equipment. And we're going to filter a couple of samples there just out of curiosity, but it won't get put in as part of this data set. But it will be interesting to know. Yep.
For your, not the current grant, but the second grant,
I interned with Keep Tampa Bay Beautiful.
Uh-huh.
I created a series of eco kayak tours, but they're based on citizen science, and one of them is the life cycle of trash. But if you do get proof of that, I could easily work in that they would collect a sample of water
Awesome.
from the bottle for you and,
Yeah.
and mark where it's coming from, because they're going to be doing it for the trash anyway. So.
Great. And the geographic area, that it has a somewhat restricted geographic area, but basically it goes from St. Augustine down to Orlando, over to Ocala, and then basically the rest of the peninsula south. The EPA designates these watershed areas, and your project could only occur within a single watershed area, but fortunately in Florida they have this one kind of giant watershed area that was able to take advantage of it. Doesn't allow us to, expand this in the panhandle, but at least it would allow us to do those inland and freshwater
It's like
areas.
right at the headwaters of the Pogo River and
Mhm.
and the bay. So-
And Lara Milligan in Pinellas County is my co-PI on that grant, so she'll be heavily involved.
So basically the scope of this grant is you're doing sampling, collecting the data, maybe classifying it, outreach. But the scope seems that it's a little larger than that. I mean, have you guys have talked any communications with like tertiary and quaternary plants that are treat the water? Because this has been an issue that I have heard for 15 years ago since I was in microbiology.
Right.
And there were talks, especially with when I was working with some plants back home, we were installing some micro nets to capture those back in the islands. I'm from Puerto Rico, we had that issue.
Right.
And my university, when I was doing microbiology, was working with something similar to what you were doing. So that is one.
Mm-hmm.
Second, in regards to like the recycling programs, I know a lot of people that want to recycle, but if you live in an apartment in Florida, you do not have a place to recycle basically unless they take the initiative of doing that, and it's very limited. So there's a lot of different, I mean, my fear, and it happens with a lot of these things like this, is the data gets accumulated, the
And then so
outreach
what?
is not, and it's just like it will not take until another 10 more years for
Yeah.
another outreach.
So when it comes to the wastewater treatment plants, I've actually been asked to give a presentation about microplastics at a meeting in May that is the Florida Industrial Pretreatment Association meeting. One of the people who works for the city of St. Augustine in their utilities department is the president-elect for that group, and she was aware of this project. She's asked me to come and speak to them. I think that's awesome. I have no idea sort of what technologies are involved with the wastewater treatment side of things. She was talking about them having to remove the grease and things like that. I think that's the perfect audience to maybe come up with, could you set up some sort of electrostatic attraction thing that would draw these microplastics? I don't know, but that group will. So I'm excited about going and talking to them. There are some groups in Europe that are working on filters for washing machines that you could then retrofit your washing machine with. I don't know what stage that is at, but that might be something that'll come down the road. And then, I know I had the recycling. One of the big challenges with the recycling, I gave this presentation at one point, and one of the gentlemen in my audience used to own a recycling company. And he came up to me afterwards and he was talking to me and he said, you probably might be better off just removing recycling from one of your recommendations. I said, why? He said, there's no market for recycling plastic. And there have been some news stories about this since then. Basically, it's cheaper for companies to make plastic from raw materials than from recycled materials, and they're not buying recycled plastic. So a lot of what we put in to be recycled, if it's plastic, it's ending up nowadays probably going to landfill. A few years ago, it would get sold to some other countries, but that even has come to an end, which might not be a bad thing. So really reducing your consumption of single-use plastics, I think, is even a more important step than recycling. The other thing he told me was that they've done studies, and in places where recycling programs are available, people tend to purchase more plastic items because the mentality is, I can recycle it, so it's okay. Whereas if recycling isn't an option, people maybe don't purchase them as much, which is kind of sad. Maybe we need to do away with the recycling programs, and maybe that would help us reduce our amount of plastic consumption.
Yeah, but it will goes. I think it goes down to policy. Like it was in on the Facebook page, like San Francisco.
Right.
I mean, it goes back to policy because if the market is not there to cause that pressure, policy will be the only way. And I mean, unfortunately, it has this information will have to eventually make it into like politicians and.
Yeah. One of the groups that's interested in partnering, and if I get the additional funding, will be able to participate, is Florida A&M University's law school. I've talked to one of their environmental law professors, and they have a program that pairs up the law students with science students, and they have to do joint projects. And she sees microplastics as being an ideal partnership because it does have those policy implications as well as having the science biological implications. So I'd be really excited in getting their group involved, but because they're based in Orlando, we'd need to get this additional funding.
And also, I think there's some really interesting synergy here that citizen science provides. If you think about 2 weeks ago when we talked about individual change versus state change and trying to find a way to connect those two. And so if you have, I'm thinking of the example of the National Microbead-Free Waters Act, which I think for anyone who hasn't participated in this project and hasn't really been paying attention to microplastics as opposed to just microbeads, and I was saying to Maya earlier when the samples were going around, when you look at the, and I don't know if it's true for men's facial products, but like women's facial products, I've bought that scrub, that orange one. Like I've owned that one. Yep. Anyone else in the room owned that one?
My son did.
Yeah, and so it's like that, when you say to me, that's microplastics in those products, I think to myself, like, oh, that makes sense because I felt it against my skin. And then you say it's in the toothpaste, I'm like, I haven't really thought about it that much. And so when I hear about the Microbeads Act, if I'm not educated and I don't know that there are also fibers, right, that the problem is not limited to microbeads, that it's other kinds of plastics, I as an individual think, problem solved,
right.
Great. And I need that, I need some kind of knowledge or experience to help me understand that there's more to it in order to make me support further policy, right? So if somebody came to the Senate right now and said, we really need an expansive microplastics, well, I guess the House first. We really need an expansive microplastics act. I think a lot of people in the U.S. who have not paid attention to the issue would say, we already took care of that.
Right.
And there's no political will to support that kind of policy making. Versus, I'll bet you a lot of people, anyone who's pulled a sample out of the ocean that had a lot of fibers in it, would hear, we need a microplastics act that goes beyond microbeads, and would go, damn right we do. Right? And so I think that there's something about the citizen science where it's not even necessarily the data collection itself, but the generation of political will at that individual scale that might help with the kinds of policy. It's not sufficient. You're absolutely right.
The number of people that she's having on what she's doing may lead to the number of people that is necessary to put a petition.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, maybe a goal that could be put into it would be like, get the people that are involved to sign a petition and get it to the police.
Sure, something like that.
I mean, there's a lot of, it always, these things always like affects me because there's a lot of potential in them. And going back to rhetoric, what we were talking last time, when I'm thinking about what I'm going to do for here, I have to think about the audience. Is the common folk, will it be politicians, will be like scientific people, and then the language again. I mean, the way that you're going to deliver the message, because like people that, don't know squat, they'll benefit from getting it all because they don't even know that those microfibers are coming out of their, as little as, or their sheets that they're buying on their everyday, or their clothing. While people just think about just plastics and all that stuff.
Right.
Thinking about a lot of different ways to kind of like get the message across.
And it was interesting because after that microbead bill passed, I had a phone call from a student reporter at the University of Florida who was doing an article for the newspaper, and she said, oh, so I hear you've got this project. She said, how do you think the passage of this bill is going to affect the data that you're getting? And I said, not at all.
Yeah.
And so that kind of burst the balloon for her story, and she wasn't at all interested in learning that the majority of the plastics are fibers, because anyway. Right. But one other thing that I was going to mention when you talk about policy, the state of Florida is in the process of trying to write a marine debris reduction plan. There's a bunch of people involved. Some of the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission folks are taking the lead on it, but it's a multi-agency, multi-person project. And there are different working groups working on different sections of the plan. one of the people in charge of the environmental sort of working group, environmental and habitats working group, contacted me when she found out about this project, and she said, we need this data, because how do we know what our reduction plan should be if we don't know what's out there? And I thought that was a really good point. And when you think about that, well, what other data do we have for marine debris? We've got the coastal cleanup, but that's, that's about it. So hopefully, and I am now involved in that working group, and I'm providing them with everything as it comes through. Maybe it will find itself into at least a plan. Could that lead to some statewide implementation of things with wastewater? I don't know. But there's definitely a potential pathway there. So I think there is some cause for optimism and hope. I think there are some things that can be done. And the more people that are aware and are thinking and trying to come up with solutions, not everything's going to work necessarily, but the more ideas we have, the better. So, any other questions?
We have time for one more before we should take a break. Anyone? Anyone?
Pressure's on. Who's going to come up with the last question before you can take a break?
Well, if no one in the class has one, we have two from the online class that they have
Wonderful.
offered. So I will ask on behalf of Sarah. And to some extent, I think that you have touched on this a little bit in talking about the undergraduate.
Okay.
But Sarah was wondering if, particularly with the K through 12 materials, if the project or any of the coordinators have been working with school boards, since a lot of the educational and videos, PowerPoints and videos could be easily added to classrooms even below the undergraduate level. So are there attempts to get students involved in collecting samples or set up field trips with science classes, anything like that?
I can tell you that several of my colleagues who have school-aged children had their school-aged children do science fair projects on this topic. I presented this information at both the Florida Marine Science Educators Association meeting last May and the National Marine Educators Association meeting, which was held in Newport, Rhode Island, last June. The meeting at the Florida conference, I had 33 participants, which is huge for that conference. I had 66 at the national conference, and I was in a room that was probably a quarter of the size of this room. They were literally out in the hallway sticking their heads around trying to get in. I had 215 requests from educators for that PowerPoint. I put it out on our National Marine Educators listserv because I knew there were people who had not managed to make it into the room at NMEA, and there were people who couldn't attend the conference. 215 educators requested information. I did follow-up surveys with folks to see if they had implemented stuff, and this ranges from informal to formal educators, but several of them said that they were implementing it in their classrooms. I had 50 people altogether who said that they were implementing it in some way, shape, or form in their education programs. One of my colleagues who works for Ohio Sea Grant took my PowerPoint and converted it into a learning module. There's a program called Nearpod, and so she developed this teaching module, which is downloadable through the K-12 resources on the website. It's free. Teachers can get a free subscription or a free membership, whatever, and they can download it and use it. So I've shared that with teachers in my counties. I work very closely with the science curriculum folks, actually statewide. I'm on the state science fair board, and so I work with a lot of the regional coordinators. One of my colleagues in Sarasota County has just purchased her own sets of equipment. She's going to be working exclusively with K-12. I'm going tomorrow to talk about microplastics at the Canterbury School in St. Pete. I've worked with one local middle school in St. Augustine whose teacher has a science club, 7th grade science club, and she had her students go and collect water samples, and I loaned her my equipment, and she worked with them on that. So at individual levels, it's happening. It would be a difficult thing to get implemented on a district-wide basis, partly because of the need for the equipment. And one set of equipment, so one microscope, one set of filtration stuff, and I think 20 water bottles is a little over $600. So it's not super expensive, but for a school teacher, it's not stuff that they're going to have around. At a university setting, they may well have access to it. Several of the colleges that I've worked with already had that set up. So hopefully that answers all of that.
Yes, and then Sarah had one other, which is she is wondering if you have priorities in terms of people you're targeting to collect the sample, or if it's really just targeting of opportunity, whoever coordinators happen to be able to access.
It's really open-ended. I've got the volunteers that I'm directly coordinating. I've got 2 college students, 1 undergraduate, 1 graduate student. I have a number of people who are retirees, and mostly those are people who've come to my education programs in the past. And so when I was recruiting, I send out emails to people who've come to my programs in the past, and they responded. It's something, as far as the water collection, anybody can do it. I know up in St. Johns County, they've actually got, Kai is probably a high school student at this point, who's one of their people collecting water samples, and her mom is leading the whole volunteer effort up there. So the filtration part probably is best for upper middle to high school age students, just because you're working with glass filtration stuff, and it requires a little bit of patience, and the observation under the scope requires a little bit of patience, but there's nothing to say that high school or upper middle school students couldn't do it. I think the ones who did the science fair project, 2 that I can think of, 1 is 7th grade and 1 is high school.
All right. Well, it is a good time. Oh,
Do you have a YouTube channel, like, or something like that, other than the Facebook? Like, a lot of people, like myself, I don't have Facebook, so it's kind of like...
Right. I don't. We have one, so I'm part of UF IFAS Extension, and I'm in the central district of IFAS Extension. And there is a central district YouTube channel, but it's got a lot of stuff, everything from agriculture to horticulture to 4-H youth development.
But nothing specific for it.
There is nothing specific for the project. If somebody wanted to take that on, I would be thrilled. People have asked for, a video of the actual filtration process, which makes absolute sense. I just haven't had a chance to put anything together, and it's not something that would be difficult to do.
Yeah.
And I think it would be very well received by people. So, my manual may be written well enough, but it never hurts to have visuals. That's always very useful.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
so you've got all sorts of ideas.
I was about to say, that-
you've got
that
50
was-
projects you can work on.
Was it a
Awesome.
question or an idea, John?
It's kind of a question.
Okay. Because if you have ideas that you want to vet, we're going to do that as soon as the break happens.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, I got ideas too, but
okay, well, ask the question, save your ideas.
okay. Do water management facilities, have they looked into like filtrating microplastics at all, or is it?
So on my advisory committee for my program, I have 2 folks who work, well, one directly who's with the county utilities and one who's a county environmental planner in a different county. And I've talked with them and I've picked their brains. And the big challenge is this stuff is so small.
Yeah.
And they're dealing with 2-4 million gallons of water a day. And how do you filter that much water for those tiny particles without having to change that filter every 30 seconds?
I mean, you said they're buoyant, right?
Yes. They're buoyant, but they're tiny.
Yeah.
I literally went through, I had a bunch of filters that had samples on them that I'd been using to show people. I literally went through and picked out 37 of these little fibers and put them in a little vial, thinking, oh, I'm going to come to this group and it would be really cool. How many of these fibers do I have to put in here before they're visible? Well, I picked off all 37 that I had, and you can't see them with the naked eye. You can see them at 40 times magnification in the microscope, but they're that tiny. This stuff is huge by comparison to some of those fibers.
And I can say more about that. My partner is the chemical quality control guy at a surface water treatment plant in Brandon. And so when we started talking with Maya back before the semester started, I've been talking to him about this issue all along, and he had some interesting things to say. One of which is that the plant he's at is billed as one of the more sustainable water treatment plants. It's the entire process is gravity driven, so they don't have to generate any external energy to actually move the water, for example. And one of the ways that they maintain the sustainability of the plant is their primary filtration system is carbon. And the carbon removes a lot of the harmful elements from the water, but it's a careful balance because there are elements that you want to maintain in the water, additives that they've put in order to scrape out other things, which means that the size of this, like literally if you were to control that small, then you would lose things that you need in the water additionally. It's kind of the same problem you were talking about with the ocean nets
Plankton, yeah.
and the plankton. It's a similar issue with the water treatment plant. Now on the wastewater end, I don't know anything about wastewater, but we can definitely, I could get Phil to come in and talk to you about his plant at some point if that's something you're thinking about, is making products that are targeted towards the plant side of things or the treatment side of things. Shall we take a break then? This is awesome. Thank you, Maya. Yeah. Yeah, let's reconvene at 7:55. Take a breather, take a walk.
Take 15.
Smoke them if you got them.
Are
there microphones?
You're behind me, and this is going to be kind of free form. What ideas do you have now? These are, you're clear on what we're asking you to think about, right? Projects, things that you in groups might do as part of the engagement in the electronic outreach and website. Projects for the third assignment in the class. And, good project, bad project, too big, too small, doesn't matter, don't edit it, we'll worry about it later. We're going to collect them all, and we're going to be collecting them from the online course, right? And we will, correct me if I'm wrong, we are going to winnow these down to a relatively finite number of what look like really good projects, and then let you guys tell us what your first, second, third, probably only 3 choices are, and then you're going to get to, if it's your idea, great. If it's somebody else's idea that you think is totally super cool whammy, that's cool. And we will try to give everybody their first choice, but we will identify you in groups of 3, at max 4 people, to work on an idea and a project for the rest of the semester on this. Yes, Joshua?
So you're going to assign groups based off our personal interest in that project?
Yes.
Correct.
With the critical addition that team projects don't have to be exclusive, so 2 teams could be working on the same project. So the only reason that we would need to give you your second choice instead of your first choice is if there was a huge imbalance somehow in, like...
everybody want to do the same thing.
Yeah. Or not even everybody want to do the same thing, but we want all the teams to be 3 to 4 people, so if there's no way to make that happen, if you are going to have to be a 5th wheel, and you should know that if we give you the second choice, it's because we think you are awesome and can totally handle the disappointment.
Groups of more than about 4, the group dynamic gets really wonky over about 4 people.
You've all
it
done
never
this,
really works.
right?
3 is the minimum, 4 is ideal, 5 is too many, 2 is, unless you're Cagle and I, you've been working together for a long time, 2 is too little. But we will let you pick them, and we will assign you to groups, yes,
frankly,
based on what your interest in that project is.
And frankly, our 2 is a lot easier now that we have a 3rd. So
Yes.
thank you so much.
Okay.
So right now, it's just whatever sticks. Just throw it up there.
You toss out an idea, and I think Cagle volunteered to do the typing. She does that because I'm a terrible typist. What ideas do you have? Joshua?
Julio kind of mentioned making the video for the filtration. You can even do it for collecting the samples, like having students draw out and film themselves collecting the samples.
So tell you what, I'll start because it sounds like there's maybe a theme immersion.
Video of.
So we've got sample collection, we've got the filtration and analysis process.
What
Is that
else?
the right terminology, Maya?
That's fine.
Okay.
What else might you videotape?
Or other ideas. We don't have to.
Anything else?
I put like on a video, but with like commercial focus, like an advertisement or something like that, like
Public service
water,
announcement.
where all the microplastics are going to. I don't know.
Okay, so ad or a public service announcement maybe might be another way of describing it.
Are you thinking like kind of like that the TED video that Maya showed, but shorter
No,
so you
something,
could watch it?
yeah, something short, like
Yeah.
30 seconds.
But content-wise, so it's just like informative, like this is the problem.
Yeah.
Or would it be specifically about the FMAP project? Are you thinking?
Not quite sure yet.
Okay,
And-
no, that's fine.
And we also might want to think about whether these
Big
things,
project.
these things would be standalone or something that would be on, from, linked to Maya's site as well. Okay, good idea, good idea. Other ideas? Joshua.
Finding a way to engage like undergrads, basically, to start collecting data, so, and then getting them involved in the lab also. So chemistry, science students in particular, across universities.
Oh, not just here?
I mean, yeah, here's a great start, but like even other universities across the state, at least like the ones near the water, so like Miami, UNF.
And do that electronically as opposed to, because if you're going to do Miami and UF, you're not going to be physically there.
No.
The closest, somebody in here was talking to me about the faculty member at Eckerd. There's a faculty member at Eckerd College in St. Pete who does, in marine science, who does a lot of work on microplastics. And we might think about figuring out how to partner with him and or his students over at Eckerd.
So it sounds to me like there's sort of two things, which is either actually going out and creating connections for the FMAP, or creating materials that could go online that could be used by other people to help build those connections. Maybe, I don't know. Okay.
Increase awareness using hashtag activism.
Ooh, some hashtag activism. What?
Is it Dr. Duncan at Eckerd?
No, I can't remember his name. Begins with an H. I don't know him personally. I heard the name 3 weeks ago, but I can find out easily enough.
Was it Hastings?
Yes, Hastings. Thank you. Very good. See, she knows everybody. Other ideas?
Ask the expert.
Patel.
Sure. First, on the webpage, I think the first is too much like text. I'll say try to do something on the webpage.
Marine biologist
Well, and I'll
Loud? What? I didn't hear you. Sorry.
It's laid out like a marine biologist designed it.
Imagine that.
Okay, so one way to generalize that, yes, she's doing it. Analyze and revise the text, the layout, the design, the visuals on the web page. You know, this was done, you know, it's wonderful, it's done, but not by somebody who's a specialist in, you know, web page and design and page design, visual design. Yep.
Which I know some of you in the room have that kind of design experience.
Yes, and you know, play to your strengths. If you're really good at this, you know, you could be in that group and teach other people in the group how to do it.
Well, I have another one about the pledgers. Well, something, you know, so we could, well, we have the Earth Day here, like, we sponsor April 23rd. We could have it, like, on a expedition to drive to get people to play.
Talk louder, I can't hear anything.
It's like a drive to get people to play.
Okay.
And she said about follow-up on the pledger, so something at the website that you can, you know, try to follow up with people after the pledge, some through initiatives and stuff like that.
Okay. You've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, but I don't know, it's too big. I was thinking about an art exhibition with the photos and kind of, I don't know, material that she already had. And to make that exhibition in some public places, like, I don't know, aquariums, museums, or bus
That's a good idea.
station. I don't know.
The art festival for Gasparilla is coming up at the end of the month.
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, I was thinking about art too. I was thinking about an art contest in which we would make like a brief description of what microplastics are and distinguish it from microbeads and like have all the summarized information, make it known to undergrads, and then there would be an art contest, and then that could be the art.
And I wonder, I have a 12-year-old who's in 6th grade who does science and is making an A, and she's a magnificently gifted artist. I wonder if we might want to think about, how do you make something like this exciting to a bunch of 12 and 13-year-olds? That might be a kind of outreach and community education that art, that might work at my daughter's middle school down in South Tampa.
Yeah. I'm not sure when it happens, but the engineering expo that happens here, how can we get involved in something like that?
All right, I'm going to display my mammoth ignorance. What engineering expo?
There's an engineering expo that USF has every year, and they host different pop-up shops of different projects, and this would be something that we could possibly talk about in the filtering process.
Okay.
It's like a zoo on campus, for a whole week. That's why you don't see it.
Wait, is it on this side of Leroy Collins too?
That side.
It's the engineering.
Oh, that's why. We're English professors. We don't leave.
Hey, I don't go to that side of campus. They rarely let me out of my office. If I'm away from my keyboard more than half an hour, alarms go off.
Oh, I think you have to ask for special permission to come into the nice building.
This is the nice building where you're not allowed to put things on the wall. In my building, it's so old, they didn't even mind when I painted my office whatever color I wanted.
What color was that?
A very tasteful, dusky arts and crafts green.
It's like a sage.
And then they repainted the whole building some hideously ugly color that came from university whatever, and now I have a kind of yellowish orange office.
It's terrible.
And I'm waiting until they forget, and then I'm going to paint it green again.
Just in case anyone's interested, I put a link to the doc that I'm typing in right now on Canvas if you want to pop into it at all. Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Paula brought up the engineering expo, and I participated in it a couple years ago, and I had an interactive model, so if anyone designed an interactive model to display that would show the filtration to the children and adults and everything, that was a really good thing.
Okay. Josh, you said you had some ideas earlier. When you had questions?
Still working it out.
Okay, still working it out. Josh,
Yeah.
you're getting there.
USF has a program, the Quality Enhancement Plan. Basically, it used to be the Global Citizenship Project.
Oh, the
which I was
QEP.
in.
The QEP.
They have those signs up everywhere for the longest time.
Yeah, they still, I don't know how much they're doing, but you get a scholarship if you fulfill certain requirements, whether it's community outreach, community activism, volunteering, etc. So maybe finding a way to integrate it with that, where they can get their volunteer hours to do stuff like this, or I think there's specific classes you can take, so finding a way to integrate it into the classes. Because it was all at one point based around the Millennium Development Goals and sustainability. So.
Yeah, that's usually an annual topic, and it's controlled from the 4th floor down.
Yeah.
It's required by the SAMLA, the Southern Association of College Accrediting.
But I think long term.
Yep, okay. Chris?
Although this particular grant is over in August.
The grant ends at the end of August. That's the end of the one-year time period, but I'm certainly hoping the project will continue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Can you renew the grant? Or,
I can't get any more money now.
No.
Chris?
But once people already have the equipment, I'm so
What
sorry.
about, we're all talking about us making a video. What if we held a video contest for maybe the whole Patel school for the one student who came up with the best video for microplastics? It would get to be on your site, so it's kind of like they can put it on their resume as I created this, on their CV as I created this video.
Let's write it down. We'll think. Yeah. As I'm thinking about it, the reason to have a contest is sort of your idea of use the contest or use the art to educate, motivate, compel people. And the Patel people are already pretty much on board there.
Well, I was going to say the whole school, but I figured that would be kind of short notice to be able to get the school on board with, but...
Yeah. I was just thinking the clientele would be better if they weren't Patel graduate students who are already sort of
But again,
there with this one.
we have time to iron out.
Yeah, well, yes, we write it down and think about it. Okay, other ideas? You have one, yes.
I was thinking about, well, I was already thinking about this, but then you mentioned your daughter and the art thing and getting 12-year-olds involved, and I taught 12-year-olds last year, the whole year.
Bless you.
And I was thinking, like, well, I don't know if anyone else wants this, but like making a lesson plan that instead of an hour and a half to graduate students, is like you probably already have this, but like a formal lesson plan that you can, because when you're searching for lesson plans online, you find them on like magio.com and like different websites. So just making a lesson plan for like middle schoolers, a 2-day lesson plan, like developing something that a teacher could look at the website and go, oh, cool, here's a lesson plan that I can download that is interesting to 12-year-olds.
Or
So you
even,
don't, oh, sorry, Carl.
no, you go ahead.
So you don't have anything, because I know there's some K through 12 materials.
Right. The only thing that is specific for microplastics is that Nearpod module. And it was designed for middle school. It's applicable for high school if students have never heard of microplastics, but it's essentially the PowerPoint presentation just made more interactive. So there's not an activity component to it or worksheets or anything else.
And there's like a genre of lesson plans, and it's like setting it out as the way that you would look at lesson plan if you were a teacher looking at a lesson plan.
Nice use of genre there. I see what you did. I like it.
I was thinking about the fact that every year my daughter has to come up with some idea for the science fair. And everybody in the family is distraught because it pushes the limits of imagination and family resources. And would there be a way that we could use this to help, take your pick? She had to do science fair stuff since like 2nd grade. Could we take advantage of the spring science fair at some of the local schools to work on microplastics? And that might involve not just making lesson plans, but some of us working physically, either online or face-to-face with teachers and students. I'm just brainstorming, but since you mentioned it, I was thinking, have the kids in my daughter's 6th grade class gather the samples, train the seniors at Plant High School to filter and analyze the samples, and have the two groups work together.
I already got a B on my daughter's science fair project for the year. No, I mean, it wasn't anything she got a chance.
I usually just run and hide. My wife comes up with a great idea. Joshua.
On a similar note, like getting kids and parents to take the pledge and like trying to initiate like individual change, and then especially when you do that, the children are often very enthusiastic. Why they're
You can guilt the parents into doing it.
yeah, building the parents into it. And it's like I'm sure there's like a weird like liability thing where you're like you can't get children to pledge to do something on your website. I don't know, like how it's like you have to be 18.
Yeah, but you can use them to bribe their parents. Guilt their parents into doing it. I was actually thinking about making my daughter's lunch, and this sounds silly. I was thinking about the fact that I pack my daughter's lunch every day and thinking about the plastics that might be involved in that. That would be a really interesting project.
This is why I never, they have all the cool services now where you can like learn how to make new dishes like Blue Apron. It'll send you a meal, all the ingredients for a meal in the mail. And so it's a great way to try out new recipes that maybe you wouldn't want to buy a ton of ingredients for, except that the packaging, I can't possibly justify that. Same idea.
Well, what about reaching
No
the
gluten.
company, the Unilever companies who maybe they can show how they did it so we can pressure some other competitors in the market or something? Or more
Can you say
Yes.
talk a little more specifically about what you're imagining
Yeah,
that might look
she's
like?
not sure what to write down.
I'm trying to translate.
Yeah.
I have in my mind, but well,
I can't help with Portuguese.
Well, we're talking about economics, so it is possible to do it. So a company did it. So how is that different for their product? The product as a marketing stuff. I'm trying to.
Okay, well what about instead of going straight to the product, just the purpose? So the purpose is maybe to brainstorm ways to pressure.
Well, maybe they're interested and put some information on the website or something like that.
Yeah, is there a way that we could talk about what Unilever did, either in some form or another, words, visuals, infographics that might go up onto that website as an example of companies that have done this and how to think about it?
she was talking about refuse, so
Yeah.
you have the option of choosing between one that has the plastic and the other one, so this is information that everyone can use it.
Mm-hmm.
Are there limitations on the kinds of information that you're allowed to share according to the grant? In terms of like talking about the companies that use microplastics, that sort of thing? I need to run stuff through the NOAA Marine Debris Program, but as long as we're not making stuff up, as long as it's based in fact.
And especially if we were telling good stories.
Right.
Look how wonderfully so-and-so did it. They're not going to object.
Right. The one thing I was thinking about along these lines is when you were talking earlier, Maya, about going to Target and trying to compare the products, like that could make a really compelling video that is well edited. Of like, just go to a store, you don't even have to show the brand name of the store, and just, look at a bunch of products side by side, and then show, you could edit it, this could be maybe the 30-second PSA, right, is edit it together, so it's like, these two products side by side, this shopping cart is filled with good products, this shopping cart is filled with bad products, like, here's how you make good choices, or something like that.
We're not even, I think that a lot of people even don't know exactly why are they bad products, or, comparable choices that don't have the.
Yeah, so part of what we might be doing is explaining and stop me if I'm wasting time, explaining what the microplastics are, what they look like, how they get there, the kind of thing that Maya was doing for us today, but in differently accommodated formats.
I was thinking along those lines, maybe doing like a best practices list on how to avoid making microplastics yourself.
Or market, like effectively market alternatives to plastic.
Hang on, Joanne, I'm sorry, I didn't hear where you started.
I was building on what he was saying, trying to think like a mindful consumer, like the different fabrics that you could buy.
Yeah, because one of the frustrating things, somebody learns about microplastics, you convince them that it's bad, and then they don't know what to do. There's nothing they can do about it, and then they just shut down and forget it.
Yeah.
So the second step is always, here's what you can do that's practical and agentive.
I'd probably even say the benefits of individual action. A lot of people probably just like, well, what I do isn't going to make a difference. But if you say,
Yep.
You know where I'm coming from here?
Absolutely. This is the efficacy issue.
Yes.
When people shut down when they don't feel like their actions are efficacious. They don't feel like they have any self-efficacy.
We talked about this in the second lecture, third class. One group of people will say, yeah, but if Professor Hurdle stops putting plastic bags in his kid's lunch, what bloody difference does that make? But if a lot of people do that, it's you begin to change your mindset and your behavior, and that form of change and mindfulness was the word you were using, begins to trade over to other things.
Well, rather than making a best practices list for buying, we could do a best practices list for behavior in terms of like stop using straws, so it's something like that.
I know that last year, I think it was, I don't remember the Israeli student's name. Really cool
Yes.
dude.
I don't remember. Who?
Asaf.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Did his infographic trying to persuade people to, and you mentioned this, Maya, when you go to a restaurant, instead of saying, yes, I want my leftovers, and they give you a plastic or a styrofoam thing, he said, just bring a piece of Tupperware with you. And, put your leftovers in the Tupperware thing. I actually sometimes do that now. Having carried a diaper bag for years with kids, I actually have a very tasteful man bag that I often carry. And there's some jokes in here. And I sometimes carry a Tupperware thing. When my daughter was young, I was in rural Iowa, and I was carrying my man bag, and we were in a farm supply store, and some very big, very rough-looking guy looked at me and said very hostily, "What do you call that thing?" And if I'd had the presence of mind, I got in my car and I thought, I should have just told him a holster. But I only figured that out, usually you figure those retorts out 10 minutes too late.
Too late.
It's a holster, buddy. What do you make of that?
All right, more ideas.
Other ideas, okay. That was my make fun of Carl for the night.
Yeah.
Other ideas?
What about, so we have only one or two things talking about the actual web pages, although I presume some of these ideas for videos are about generating content that could go on the web pages and the Facebook pages too. Paula suggested like hashtag activism. A lot of the ideas that we're generating here though have to do with either the doing, which I'm not surprised Carl and I sort of anticipated that with this particular group of students y'all would want to like go out in the world and do stuff. And then we've got a little bit with the evaluating and making, right, that second category. Not so much the evaluate and recommend, which is fine. We're certainly not saying we have to have an even spread. But are there any ideas for things that are maybe more born digital, more specifically targeted towards the digital spaces?
Did we give them those categories?
Yeah, we talked about it last week.
Okay. That would be-
Yeah.
With the hashtag activism, it could be like a marketing campaign that would include like a 30-second video, something like that. So a number of items.
Right. So like come up with a really cool hashtag,
Exactly, and pair them together.
cool hashtag to pair with made artifacts. So you have just sort of a slew of things coming out at once. I have a question. Have any of you all seen, it's been mostly on Facebook lately, I don't know if it's shown up in any of your networks, the Graduate Assistance Union's Broken Hearts campaign that's going around right now? We're in the middle of bargaining, and one of our really awesome members came up with this idea, come up with a cool hashtag, create a lot of really great content. So she's been collecting stories from graduate assistants. Most of you are not graduate assistants. You may not know that we make below poverty level wages, and they're trying to take away our health insurance. So it's a really fraught bargaining session. And she's been conducting interviews and taking these very impressive photographs. They're sort of black and white, and the graduate assistants and some faculty and undergrads are participating, holding two halves cut out of a heart, so it looks like a broken heart, and they're in bright red, and then the picture's black and white, so it's super striking. And then the whole story with the hashtag broken hearts. I used to run our Facebook page, the most impressions, so that's like the number of people's feeds that our content had showed up in a single week before was like maybe 7,500, 8,000. Last week we reached over 90,000 people. And it's because of this, it's just getting the hashtag out there attached to just a slew of cool content. It can't be one video, it's gotta be a video, a story, a picture, a video, right? You gotta keep pushing it so that you can break out of those networks. This is the digital ecology piece, right? If all you're worried about is a rhetorical situation, one video might happen. But if you're trying to hack the network, the ecology, you need more than one piece of rhetoric for that.
Yeah, on a similar note, I was going to suggest some good clickbait, you know?
Ooh, everyone loves clickbait, right?
Everyone loves clickbait, yeah. It's slightly serious, but
No, I think you're onto something.
What is that?
Yeah.
Do you want to, Joshua?
it's those articles you see on like Facebook or other news sites where it's like something sensational that you just want to click on. It's like BuzzFeed or like
Yeah.
or like
That's I literally just typed in BuzzFeed.
yeah.
Here,
It's silly stuff that everyone posts. But
this
it
vet
actually
saved a
goes
blind dog's life and brought him back to health.
Oh.
This billboard has literal bees in the trap. Right? You'll never be as chill as these lizards truly living their best life. A lot of times you'll notice I actually have a lesson that I do, and if anyone decides to do something clickbaity, I have a full lesson I do with my expository writing students about how to write these kinds of headlines. So I can share all of that stuff with you. One of my tips is start paying attention to how many times they use either the word this or these. It's never the, it's never a, it's always this or these. So it immediately draws you in. It's a specific vet, and you now have a personal investment. Anyway, I have a ton more rules like that. So if you want to write clickbaity stuff,
perpetuating it.
I will totally work with you on that.
Use
What?
the-
Perpetuating it.
Oh yeah, no, I love clickbait. I'm not judging. Yeah, Michelle.
For the website, and it probably have to kind of be a continued effort on whoever you might have, but
That would be me.
people to send pictures of themselves collecting, and then you can have a gallery, especially if you can get schools involved, and then you have the school. I mean, obviously that has its own like technical things, but you know, just if you have groups and just people, if they can take a picture, have somebody take a picture of them, and then they send it in.
And that's,
I'm just saying, I wonder if you can, I'm trying to figure out, she's gonna help, how you could use that idea of, okay, you've taken a picture of yourself doing this, can you link it to like your grandparents, your aunts and uncles,
Yes,
especially if
yes,
you're a
yes.
kid, and you begin to, you know, table!
that's what the Facebook group is for, right? So if I noticed
I
that.
fed her that one.
Thank you, I appreciate that. You missed the part where I was noticing that a lot of the content between the Facebook page and the Facebook group, a lot of shared content. And the group is the space where people can really do that work, right? So that when you post to it, it's an open group, which means that your post should be visible to your network as well. And you can also post that group and then share directly to other networks within Facebook if you wanted to.
So Julio was talking earlier about
Yeah,
people who've done some of the testing and therefore are now aware of this, and you build a sense of support for policy. I wonder if there's a way we can leverage that kind of thing so that each one of those people then becomes a kind of node in a network of all the people they know. If we can facilitate that kind of building of, so, you know, my daughter goes out and does it, and then figured out how to network that to all of her friends and extended family. So it's not just one person, but it multiplies.
I was thinking some sort of pay it forward sort of thing, where it's like you have a container and you take the sample and then you give it to someone else. I don't know.
Can the containers be reused? I
Yes.
assume as much.
Yeah.
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 Oh.
That's
Or
like
you
for
go
movement.
pick up. But people have to be trained, right? Volunteers have to be trained.
Yeah.
But something like that, like a
Not
The
trained
sample
to take
co-
the sample, but trained to
I was
do
saying, the
the
sample
filtering.
collection is pretty straightforward. There
So
is
you'll-
guidance for that, but
Yeah.
if there were a video showing.
Yeah, or like you get trained as a volunteer and you take 2 bottles with you and you get somebody else to go collect, and then maybe when they come in, they sign up for a training to do the analysis or some sort of like, okay, I like this, like thinking through the logistics of that. How do I type that up, Sam?
Go on date and get trained.
Oh, pay it forward / FMAP as dating service. Yeah,
You're gonna look at that
Oh,
tomorrow
wait,
and go,
hang on, before, we had Lena first. It's all Lena.
I don't know if it would be a good idea to display like the number of visitors or followers on Facebook or visitors on the website, so that makes people think, oh, I want to be part of. When they see numbers, they say, oh, I want to be part of this movement program.
Is there an easy access to like number of data samples or anything like that? I know you can literally see on the Google map that it doesn't list the number anywhere, does it?
no, it doesn't.
Yeah. Because that might be cool to have. Yeah.
Do the data samples you have, are they attached to individual people?
Yes.
So could we do something like either put together a contest, or just when you click on one of those data nodes, up comes, you know, a picture of the person maybe doing that and a list of how many samples they've done. I'm trying to think about competition, not quite gaming, but some kind of personal feedback
Yeah, I
and
think
reward.
it's not even necessarily gaming, but it's so if I click on that sample, for example, looking at that map, I have no idea what the diversity of people involved in this project is. Whereas it sounds like from all of the things you were talking about, and then looking at some of the other materials on the website, there's a lot of different people involved. And so if there was some, and this would maybe fall into the evaluate and recommend, right? Which is thinking about, okay, how can we add more personal touches to this? Because if I click on that map and I click on a tab and open up a picture of a youngish woman who looks like a liberal arts person, then I'm maybe more likely to be like, oh, this might be something I can get involved with, as opposed to if every picture is of people in lab coats. So the more diversity of people that we can see engaged in this project, and this maybe is something to keep in mind if people decide they want to make videos, is how do you make it not clinical, right? How do you make it not just disembodied hands working in like lab setting, how do you make it seem personal and attractive to a variety of ages or skill levels or whatever. So yeah, I like that a lot. Something, what do I type about all of this?
Personal identification and profiles of people 50 cents. Profiles, testimonials.
Testimonials was something you and I had talked about already, like testimonials or interviews with
Mm-hmm.
volunteers. Okay, Joshua, and then I saw Mary, and then Josh, and then Chris, and then we need to bring it together.
Are there any microplastics?
You're not Joshua.
Oh, I had my hand up.
I know, Joshua did too. I'm just kidding.
Josh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Josh. I'm giving you a hard
Are
time.
you sure? You can go.
So,
She's
I don't know.
dissing you. Go.
Well, I was just going to ask if there's any microplastic awareness nonprofits already out there.
Not that I know of, but that doesn't mean they don't exist.
Yeah. Okay.
So we talked about like engaging individuals, but businesses, I think you have those signs, those could be a help, but I'd imagine restaurants use a lot of meaning products. Is there any way to engage local restaurants or state restaurants to?
They use a lot of straws too.
Yeah.
Oh, and like the pledge is meant for individuals, right? But what if a business could take some kind of pledge or like put up a sign that says, which obviously that wasn't written into the grant, but like put up a sign that says, you know, we support the whatever, and then maybe your team designs the sign and then maybe tries to take some pictures of it held up and whatever.
Yeah, so one of the things that
Nice. Okay, I like this. What? I'm sorry. What?
I said you're so smart. You got it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you came up with it. I just understood it.
But,
Okay.
but restaurants will not really compromise unless you have something that you can say, they're not going to offset that, they're not going to offset that losing that revenue from people that go there. Just, you need to come up with some solution that is.
Some restaurants won't, but there are a lot of restaurants in the Tampa Bay area that have an ethos of being dedicated to sustainability, right?
And if it is something like, we don't serve drinking straws at this establishment. If you've ever gone to zoos and aquariums, a lot of them you can no longer get a drinking straw.
For sure. Busch Gardens, none of them.
So what are the chances that, especially a small, privately owned, not a big chain restaurant, would be willing to say, we are doing this because...
the kind of thing the refinery would be all over.
Or the very fancy restaurant on Beach Drive in St. Pete, Parkview, I think it's called. They are a sustainable restaurant. They serve only sustainably raised and harvested seafood.
Yeah.
All of their food is organic, sustainable, and that's how they market their restaurant. I've eaten there; it's very good. It's also very expensive, but there are places. McDonald's isn't going to do this,
right.
But there are places around here that might.
And how many of you saw the video that circulated on social media about this sea turtle that had the drinking straw stuck up its nose? Okay, lots of people nodding.
Yeah.
Drinking straws, boom. A lot of people are aware that there's an environmental issue with drinking straws.
Yeah. So then Mary and then Chris, and then we need to wrap up.
Mine was not, it was like just a little thing about one of the ones that you were talking about earlier.
What's that?
Just for the testimonial thing, like just on maybe a link that says like get involved, and it tells you what you can do, but then underneath where it tells you can do, it would have like all these other people that are.
Yeah.
So just the get involved page is really one.
I think it would be really, I won't say inspiring and compelling, but I think a lot of people would be curious. Who are these people who are doing this?
Yeah.
Oh, I know this person, or oh, they're like me, and here's what they did, here's what they look like, here's what they have to say about it, about why they did it, how they think about it, what they did. I think that would be a very useful kind of thing for a lot of potential volunteers.
And also talking about spreading things on Facebook. Somebody was talking about this. Wait, was that your idea, Sam? Something about the gallery, the website gallery. That's the kind of thing where if a video testimonial of an individual got posted, then that's a cool thing for them to share to their social networks, like a hyperlink just to their testimonial, as opposed to just saying on Facebook, like, hey, I went and put some water in a jar and then looked at it under a microscope today, which may be excited for some of their network. They can instead post a link to a video that shows some cool footage of them out doing the collection, and then maybe a little talking head interview, and it's a minute long, and it's something that they can share.
And how do you, I'm just thinking out loud, how would you build or begin to build something of a community of people? not just here are a bunch of individuals who've done this, but how do you consolidate that group of individuals into a group that has some sense of itself, not just as 30 different people, but a group of people who have something in common and a care and a value. Chris?
Well, I was going to be what my idea was, is that we create a Facebook group, and then we send a model to each and every one of the schools and invite them to join the Facebook group, and then each school videotapes their class or whoever, science teacher, whatever's doing it, as to what they're doing, and then they post it on there, and then they can each connect with each other as groups that care about microplastics.
I've got the other one.
Ours. This one. Okay. Other ideas?
Well, maybe it's not necessarily having to collect it, because some people might not have the time to go through the training. But again, going back to that, best practices list, possibly collecting all the pieces of plastic that you might have, used, and putting them in a larger back and seeing how much you can accumulate.
I wonder, this sort of falls to me under the kind of hashtag activism, clickbait articles, like other ways for people to participate in awareness raising outside of the science, citizen science. So that would be amazing. Like, capture just your plastic trash in one day, take a picture, put it on our Facebook group.
A kind of version of, the power company, TECO, will come to your house and do a power inventory or an energy inventory. They'll tell you, you're wasting this much energy with these windows, with this. And they come, you've seen them do this. I bought a house and TECO came and said, if you do this, it'll save this much energy. You're wasting this here, and here's what it'll cost you. Here are the things that are easy to do. A kind of plastics use, waste, family life, personal inventory.
Andy, last one.
Are you yawning or giggling?
I had an idea.
You're giggling.
I'm giggling, and it wasn't you. I'm having all these ideas, and they're
lots and lots of ideas. Well, hang on. Andy, last word, and then I'll say something about having more ideas.
I know it's about microplastics, and it's not as attractive as big plastics in terms of doing something. Is there any plan or anything that maybe to have like a beach cleanup as an introduction into it, where you could highlight the plastic as a problem and then transition into the microplastic?
I missed the very beginning because I realized why I can't hear you. It's because while I'm typing, the sound is just reading
So
directly.
a kind of event, like a beach cleanup, where you go out and you actually see the scope of the problem and do something fun with a group and use that as a way of then introducing them to the kind of technical aspects of the problem.
Yeah, because it's a small thing that people don't really see, and it's like, don't worry about it. But plastics in general is a problem.
I wonder if that might be, Earth Day's come up a couple of times, like a relevant activity for like Earth Day.
So was it the Great, the cleanup event coming up? The Great American Cleanup, is that it? Yeah.
Is that the same as the international one?
I think there's one in
I-
March.
Yeah.
That's
one
the
in
Great
March.
American.
Something like,
June
yeah.
America Beautiful.
So I have to shift gears, unfortunately, because we are almost out of time.
We have a few ideas of our own that we will add to this
Yes.
and post it.
So here's what Stephanie and I originally brainstormed, and then Carl and I continued looking at.
Mostly them.
And what we did was we went about it by separating it into our three big categories, which again, if you've thought about this very hard, you realize that these categories are super porous, right? Like if you're doing something like, for example, the idea of getting restaurants to sign a pledge, that might also involve making something like a poster that they can then display. You said about rewarding people. One idea I just had is like you could make cool little digital stickers so people could put it on their Facebook wall. Like if somebody sends or brings in a sample, then they get a link to a digital sticker that's like, I'm an FNAF hero or whatever. Anyway, I keep having lots of ideas too is what I'm trying to say, Sam. So we have all of these ideas split into categories. A lot of it we've hit in some form or fashion, even if obliquely, in the ideas that you just came up with. The evaluate and recommend is very much focused on thinking about, for example, ways to showcase the images of microplastics. So that's the ideas that you were having about, can we create an art installation around this? Can we find a way to make that gallery more accessible to people who don't already know what the project is? Maybe you take some pictures that put that scale in context, right? So you put it next to, here's how big this is compared to, like the solar system scale models where you can see how big things are. Other ways to show those visuals, and perhaps things that you would not have access, as Maya was saying, there's certain things you don't have control over, and you certainly don't have the access. Like, we're not asking anybody to give you the keys to the UF website. But you can make recommendations for it, for the text, for the images, for the organization, for the layout, for whatever. I think that would probably be really useful to get an audience who aren't microbiologists, marine biologists, to comment on the text and maybe make some recommendations. The evaluate and make, again, many of your suggestions already hit a lot of it. The one thing that didn't come up is the idea of specifically something like an infographic, since we're already making one in class anyway. And so you'll have some of that experience making one. And the data that Maya showed us at the end of the slide about the number of samples taken, how many volunteers there are, is the perfect kind of data to include in some sort of infographic that could celebrate the success of the project at the halfway point, or something like that.
Or any way of making the data visible, of visualizing the data, because certain people like to look at data, but a lot of people, data is just going to wash right past them and have no impact at all. But if you can figure out how to give it a visual representation that has a visual impact, that's going to be a lot more useful for certain categories of users.
Yeah. So we are in the evaluate and do. Frankly, you guys had much more interesting ideas than we did, so I wouldn't even worry about it. The only thing that we thought about that did not come up is this idea of usability testing the website. So you actually go out and get people of all different ages to work through the website. I know at least one person in the room knows what usability testing is, and work through the website and to give you feedback on what's working and what's not for them. And so basically, you're not having to go based on your assumptions about what's working or it's not. You actually develop surveys or you do Q&A or observational sessions, that kind of thing. But all of the ideas you all had, much more interesting. All right, I'm going to wrap up. We have a minute left. What we're going to do is we are going to sort these recommendations, these ideas that you came up with, into broad categories and add some of the ideas that we had and see if we can filter it down into, not by just straight up eliminating ideas. There may be some things that we talk about that we realize aren't going to fit the scope of the rest of the semester. But what we're going to try and do is collapse some of these ideas and then give it a bigger title, right? So we're not going to, video of each of these is not a separate idea. Just, I want to make videos. It's an idea. And then, hang on for me, because I really got to let you guys go. Then what we're going to do is I'll send you a link after we've collapsed it into, it's probably going to end up being between 10 and 15 ideas, give or take.
In there.
I'm going to send you a link to a quiz where you're going to rank them. And like I said, we're going to try and give everyone their #1 ranking.
It's not a quiz, you don't get a grade. That's just the easiest way for us to do this.
Yes, it's
not a test.
You know how Canvas calls everything a quiz. If it's multiple choice. So please do that as soon as you can. I'll get you the link as soon as possible because I'd like to be able to tell you by in class next week who your teams are. And then finally, we were hoping to have time today to go over the details of the assignment sheet, but frankly this discussion was far too engaging and awesome, which is fine. I'd rather talk about cool ideas than look at the assignment sheet. Please look at it on your own. And what we'll do is we'll take a few minutes next week and look at it. Just FYI, your big first deliverable is an analysis and proposal report. So we're asking you to write a brief report. It's very short, what we're asking for, 4 to 5 page, as a team, telling us what you're going to do. So that way we can head off any potential problems in the past. And that's due the week after spring break. I've officially kept you a minute late.
I'm going to add 30 seconds to that. Next week, you've got a reading assignment. We're going to be lecturing again, and then we will have, and Nanette's last name is O'Hara. She is the Public Outreach Education Coordinator for the Tampa Bay Estuary Foundation. She's going to be here in class talking about best practices for doing exactly the kind of thing you're doing. So you will hear somebody who does this for a living, and you can also ask her more questions. She's very good, and instead of just, okay, what are we going to do? This is somebody who actually does it for a big fancy group. She's going to come talk to you about things to help you think through how you might do these things. Okay, I added 30 seconds.
And now you can go what you need to do.
I was just going to ask you about the thing